Montana. Winter, 1885. The lone rider had exactly 60 seconds to live. A crimson trail marked his desperate path across the pristine snow as he crawled toward the distant lights of Remington Ranch. The bullet lodged in his back had missed his spine by a hair's breadth. Not luck, but deliberate cruelty. His killers wanted him to die slowly, to feel each ragged breath crystallize in the merciless Montana cold. Help! His voice barely disturbed the night air as blood pooled beneath him, darker than the shadows stretching across the moonlit valley. From his position on the ridge, Jackson Remington watched through eyes hardened by 5 decades of frontier life. Rifle balanced casually across his knee. His breath formed white clouds in the frigid air as he tracked the man's labored progress through his brass spyglass. "Your call, boss," his foreman whispered beside him. "That's one of Blackwood's men, the one who threatened to burn you out last month." Jackson's weathered face betrayed nothing. In these parts, a bleeding stranger could be more dangerous than a wounded wolf, especially one connected to Victor Blackwood. And Jackson Remington hadn't survived this long by taking unnecessary risks. "Let nature take its course," he said finally, collapsing the spyglass with a decisive snap. "Man makes his choices. Death collects the debt." The dying man clawed forward one final time before collapsing face first into the crimson-stained snow. He never moved again. Jackson turned his horse toward home, the wind howling around him like lost souls seeking redemption. 48 years on this earth had taught him one certainty. In Montana winters, death came quick and justice quicker. But sometimes fate had other plans. The Remington Ranch house stood like a fortress against the gathering blizzard, lamplight gleaming from frost-laced windows. Inside, a fire blazed in the stone hearth of Jackson's study, casting dancing shadows across leather-bound ledgers that documented every acre, every head of cattle, every dollar of the 5,000-acre empire he'd carved from wilderness with his Colt revolver and relentless will. Jackson Remington was the most feared man west of the Missouri River, and the loneliest. 3 winters ago, diphtheria had taken his wife Elizabeth and 8-year-old daughter Jane within a week of each other. Since then, the walls of his house had held nothing but silence and the ghosts of broken promises. He'd built this ranch for them. Without them, it was just land and livestock. Jackson poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey, the bottle now a nightly ritual. He still set the table for 3 sometimes, a momentary lapse that would send him into darker moods for days after. His men had learned to avoid him during these times, all except old Tom, who'd fought Blackfoot warriors alongside Jackson back when Montana was still wild territory. "Storm's getting worse," old Tom announced, stomping snow from his boots as he entered. "Going to be a bad one." Jackson merely grunted, eyes fixed on the amber liquid in his glass. "Found something you should see out by the north barn," Tom continued. "Not something, someone." Jackson's head snapped up. "Blackwood's men? Not unless they've taken to traveling with women and children." The wind cut like a knife as Jackson followed Tom through knee-deep snow toward the barn. His hand rested on the walnut grip of his Colt single-action army revolver, the peacemaker that had brought anything but peace to those who crossed him. They huddled against the lee side of his barn, half buried in snow, a woman clutching a small boy wrapped in a threadbare blanket. The woman's face was gaunt, but her eyes burned with the fierce determination of someone who'd stared down hardship and refused to blink. "This is private property," Jackson growled, his breath clouding in the frigid air. The woman slowly stood, and Jackson tensed as her hand moved inside her coat. When it emerged, she was holding a snub-nosed revolver, an old Navy Colt conversion, well-maintained despite its age. "We're not begging," she said, her voice steady despite the cold. "I'm looking for work. My son and I need shelter, and I can earn our keep." Jackson's eyes narrowed. "You always negotiate with a gun, lady?" "The name's Sarah Mitchell. This is my son, Daniel." The boy peered up at Jackson with wary eyes too old for his young face. "And I'll put my gun away when I know we're safe." Something in her gaze, fierce, desperate, and proud, reminded Jackson of a younger version of himself, back when he'd first claimed this land with nothing but a rifle and determination. "Last woman who pointed a gun at me," Jackson said slowly, "is buried on that hill yonder." Sarah didn't flinch. "And the last man who threatened my son is feeding the worms in a silver mine near Helena." Old Tom chuckled quietly behind Jackson. "She's got spirit, boss." Against his better judgment, Jackson nodded toward the bunkhouse. "You can stay there tonight. Come morning, we'll see what you can do." His eyes hardened. "But I'm watching you, Mrs. Mitchell. I don't take kindly to thieves or liars." As they trudged through deep snow toward the bunkhouse, the boy looked back over his shoulder at Jackson, studying him with unnerving intensity. "You're that man they talk about in town," the boy said suddenly. "The one who hanged those cattle rustlers last spring." Jackson met the child's gaze without blinking. "That's right, son." And they had it coming. Sarah pulled Daniel closer, whispering, "It's okay, we're safe for tonight." Jackson pretended not to hear, but something in her voice made him wonder what, or who, they were running from. In his experience, women didn't learn to handle revolvers that well, without damn good reason. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah proved herself around the ranch. Her small hands were deceptively strong, and she worked without complaint from dawn till dusk. The boy, Daniel, was quiet but watchful, following Jackson like a shadow whenever permitted. One morning, Jackson found Daniel struggling with a rope by the corral, trying to mimic the knots the ranch hands tied. "You're doing it wrong, boy," Jackson said gruffly. He knelt beside Daniel, his calloused hands guiding the child's smaller ones. "Like this. This here's a bowline. Won't slip, won't give. The kind of knot you can trust your life to." Daniel nodded solemnly, his face scrunched in concentration. "My pa was teaching me knots before he died," the boy said quietly. Jackson's hands stilled. "That's so. Mama says he was a mining man. Could find silver in rock just by looking." Daniel glanced up. "Did you know my pa?" "A strange question." "Can't say I did." "Some men say you did. I heard them in town when Mama thought I was sleeping." Jackson's eyes narrowed. "What men?" But Daniel had already returned his attention to the rope, small fingers working the knot with surprising dexterity. Jackson made a mental note to have Tom ask around town about Sam Mitchell. That afternoon, Mike Donovan, Jackson's longtime trail boss, cornered Sarah by the water pump. Jackson watched from the barn doorway, unseen by either. "Awful convenient, ain't it?" Mike sneered, leaning too close. "Pretty widow shows up just as the boss is getting soft in his old age. What are you really after? His land? His money?" Sarah's face whitened, but before she could respond, Mike continued, his voice dropping lower. "Blackwood's mighty interested in you being here. Paying good money to know the comings and goings around this ranch." Jackson's blood ran cold. Before Sarah could answer, he stepped forward, the boards creaking beneath his weight. Mike spun around, his face draining of color. "Boss, I was just—" Jackson's fist connected with Mike's jaw, the impact lifting him clean off his feet. As Mike tumbled into the snow, Jackson stood over him, voice deadly quiet. "Pack your things. You ride out before sundown or I'll feed you to the wolves piece by piece." Mike scrambled backward, blood trickling from his split lip. "You're making a mistake. Blackwood's got plans." "Then you can tell him his plans just changed." Jackson's hand dropped to his holster. "Now get." Mike staggered to his feet, spitting blood into the snow before stalking off toward the bunkhouse. Jackson turned to find Sarah staring at him, her expression unreadable. "Why does Blackwood care that we're here?" she asked quietly. "That's what I aim to find out." Jackson studied her face. "You know him?" A shadow passed across her features. "No, but my husband did." That night, Jackson pretended to doze in his study chair, one hand loosely draped over the armrest. His breathing slow and measured. He'd loosened his collar and let the fire burn low, a loaded shotgun hidden beneath the blanket across his lap. The grandfather clock struck 11. Soft footsteps approached, hesitant, barely audible above the crackling fire. The study door creaked open, then closed gently. Jackson remained motionless as the scent of soap and cold wool reached him. Sarah moved quietly across the room, but she didn't reach for his ledgers or desk drawers as he half expected. Instead, she carefully tucked the blanket higher around his shoulders, her fingers brushing against his shirt collar. She stoked the dying fire, adding another log. Then, to his surprise, she placed something warm by his feet, a heated stone wrapped in cloth. "So you don't wake with frozen feet," she whispered, before tiptoeing away. Jackson almost opened his eyes. Almost. But then came a second, smaller set of footsteps. "Mama?" Daniel whispered from the doorway. "Inside voice, darling," Sarah murmured. "Mr. Remington is sleeping." "Is he still sad, Mama?" There was a pause. "Yes, I think so." "Like Papa used to be?" "Yes, a different kind of sad. But you can see it in his eyes." Jackson felt something shift inside him, like ice cracking under spring sun. "He showed me how to tie knots today," Daniel said, "just like Papa did. And he didn't even yell when I did it wrong." Jackson's fingers tightened imperceptibly on the shotgun beneath the blanket. Something about the boy's words struck him as odd, but he couldn't place why. Sarah's voice softened. "Let's say our prayers and let him rest." To Jackson's astonishment, they knelt near his chair. Sarah took her son's small hand and began to pray in a low, trembling voice. "Dear Lord, thank you for this roof, this warmth, and for Mr. Remington who gave it to us." "Thank you for Mr. Remington," Daniel echoed. "Please help his heart find peace," Sarah continued. "Let him know he's not alone, even when he feels it. And help us, Lord, to earn our place here, to take nothing more than we need." Jackson's throat tightened, his fingers relaxing their grip on the shotgun. "And if the day comes when we must leave," Sarah whispered, "let us do so with dignity, not as beggars." "Amen," Daniel yawned. "Amen," Sarah echoed, kissing her son's forehead. "Time for bed, sweetheart." After they left, Jackson opened his eyes to the empty room. The fire had dwindled to glowing embers, but something inside him burned hotter than before. For the first time in years, Jackson Remington felt something other than cold rage. He just wasn't sure whether to trust it. The pounding on the front door came at dawn, violent enough to shake the whole house. Jackson was already dressed, Colt loaded, and ready. "Stay back," he ordered Sarah and Daniel, who had emerged wide-eyed from their room. 3 men stood on his porch, unshaven and mean-eyed. The one in front wore a silver marshal's badge that Jackson would bet his best stallion was stolen. "Remington," the man nodded. "Name's Carver. Looking for a woman and her boy, Sarah Mitchell." Jackson's expression remained impassive. "What business you got with a woman and child?" Carver spat tobacco juice onto the porch. "The boy's father was Sam Mitchell. Worked our mine before an accident." His eyes narrowed. "Sam had something that belongs to us. A map to a gold seam he discovered on your property. His wife took it when she ran." Jackson felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. So that was Blackwood's game. "I don't know anything about a map," Jackson said evenly. "And I haven't seen any strangers." "That's mighty interesting," Carver sneered. "'Cause we followed their tracks straight here before the snow covered them. And that gelding in your corral has Mitchell's brand." Jackson's hand moved to his holster. "I'd hate to think you're calling me a liar on my own property, Carver. That'd be your second mistake today." "What was my first?" Carver asked, his own hand hovering near his gun. "Coming here at all." Jackson's voice was deadly quiet. The standoff stretched for 10 seconds. 20. From inside, Jackson could feel Sarah and Daniel watching, could sense their fear like a tangible thing. Finally, Carver backed down, but his parting smile sent ice through Jackson's veins. "We'll be staying in town. When you remember seeing them, come find me." He mounted his horse. "Shame about your north fence line. Heard a tree fell on it during the night. Lot of wolves in these parts. Hate to think of your cattle wandering." As they rode away, Jackson turned to find Sarah standing in the hallway, face pale as the snow outside. "You lied for us," she whispered. "Tell me about the map," Jackson said flatly. Sarah's eyes flashed. "There is no map. Sam was a dreamer and a fool, but he wasn't a thief. Those men, her voice broke. They caused the mine collapse that killed him. When I demanded justice, they came after us. The map is just an excuse. Jackson studied her face, searching for deception but finding none. Carver doesn't work for himself, he said finally. Someone's pulling his strings. Someone who wants my land. Blackwood, Sarah whispered. Jackson nodded. Pack your things. Those men will be back, and next time, they won't be talking. Where will we go? Sarah asked, clutching Daniel's shoulders. Jackson checked his revolver, spinning the cylinder with practiced precision. You're not going anywhere. I'm fortifying the ranch. His eyes met hers. No one threatens what's under my protection. For 3 days, Jackson and his loyal hands prepared the ranch like a fortress. They stockpiled ammunition, boarded vulnerable windows, and established lookout points. The men who remained, those who hadn't sided with Mike Donovan when he quit, were all veterans of frontier life who'd fought raiders and renegades before. Jackson was inspecting the northern fence line when he spotted a rider approaching. Victor Blackwood, owner of the Bitter Creek Bank and the town's wealthiest resident. He rode a magnificent black stallion, his tailored eastern suit incongruous against the rugged landscape. Remington, Blackwood called, tipping his hat. Thought we should talk man to man. Jackson waited, saying nothing. Railroads coming through, Blackwood continued, undeterred. They're looking at routes now. Your land would make a perfect junction point. My land's not for sale. $30,000, Blackwood said smoothly. 3 times what it's worth? Jackson's eyes narrowed. If Blackwood was offering that much, the land was worth far more, especially with gold involved. If it's worth that much to the railroad, then it's worth more to me to keep it. Blackwood's smile tightened. I heard you've got some guests. The Mitchell woman and her boy. Folks in town are talking. Some say you're harboring fugitives. That a threat? Just looking out for an old friend. Blackwood's eyes hardened. You know, it's strange. Sam Mitchell worked for me before he died. Surveying for minerals. Smart man, but careless. Started talking about a big find right before that unfortunate accident. Jackson's hand moved imperceptibly closer to his holster. Never got to see his final maps, Blackwood continued. His widow left town rather suddenly, taking something that rightfully belongs to me. Get off my land, Jackson said quietly. Think about my offer. It won't stay open forever. Blackwood turned his horse. Would be a shame if something happened to that woman or her boy while under your roof. Might damage your reputation. As he rode away, Jackson felt the pieces clicking into place like chambers in a revolver. Sarah was gone the next morning. She'd left a note. I won't bring danger to your door. You've done more than enough. We'll be fine. Her traveling bag remained on the porch. Jackson tracked her to Bitter Creek, moving silent as a wolf through the morning fog. He watched as she entered Blackwood's office above the bank, Daniel in tow. 2 hours later, they emerged. Blackwood's smug expression told Jackson everything he needed to know. That night, as Jackson pretended to sleep in his study chair, Sarah returned. She moved to his side, her presence now familiar in the darkness. I made a terrible mistake, she whispered, though she thought he couldn't hear. I trusted the wrong man again. Jackson heard the catch in her voice as she continued. Sam worked for Blackwood, surveying for minerals. He found gold on your land, Mr. Remington, under the north ridge where the creek bends. Blackwood wants it, and he's working with Carver's men to get it. She placed a folded paper on his desk. This is the real map. Sam sent it to me before he died. I didn't understand what it meant until today. Rain began to patter against the windows, unusually warm for the season. The spring thaw was coming early, and with it, trouble. As Sarah turned to leave, Jackson spoke, startling her. Why didn't you tell me the truth from the beginning? Sarah froze, then slowly turned. How long have you been awake? Long enough. Jackson sat up, fixing her with a penetrating stare. Sam Mitchell wasn't just your husband, was he? He was my brother's boy. Sarah's face paled. You knew? Not until today. Old Tom recognized the surname, got to digging. Found letters from my brother John before he died in the war. He had a son. Named him Sam. Sam never knew, Sarah whispered. His mother remarried. Took her new husband's name, Mitchell. Jackson stood, moving to the fire. That makes the boy my kin. My great-nephew. He turned to Sarah. That's why you came here, isn't it? You knew who I was all along. Sarah nodded slowly. Sam told me if anything happened to him to find his Uncle Jackson. Said you wouldn't turn away family, even if you pretended not to care about anything anymore. Jackson stared into the fire for a long moment. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough. Family doesn't mean what it used to. Not since I buried mine. I know what loss feels like, Sarah said quietly. But that boy needs you, and I think maybe you need him too. Before Jackson could respond, a shot rang out from the direction of the bunkhouse. Stay here, he ordered, grabbing his rifle. Lock the door behind me. Outside, hell had come to Remington Ranch. By morning, the unseasonable rain had turned to a deluge. The creek rose 6 feet by noon, threatening the lower pastures where the yearling calves were penned. Jackson rode out with his remaining men, working frantically to move the livestock to higher ground. He didn't see Sarah following him until it was too late. She appeared through the downpour, soaked to the skin, her horse struggling against the current where the road had flooded. Go back, he shouted over the storm. The dam, she called back. Blackwood ordered it blown. The whole valley will flood. As if summoned by her words, a distant boom echoed across the hills. Seconds later, a wall of water surged around the bend, carrying debris and destruction in its wake. The storage barn, Jackson yelled, pointing to the sturdy structure on higher ground. Go! They barely made it, dragging their horses inside as the floodwaters surged past. The barn shuddered with each impact of debris against its walls. Inside, they stood dripping and gasping for breath. Jackson rounded on her. Where's Daniel? Safe with old Tom in the main house. I couldn't let you drown without knowing the truth. Before Jackson could respond, a gunshot splintered the barn door. Through the gap, he glimpsed Carver and 3 of his men, rifles raised. Nowhere left to run, Mitchell, Carver called. Give us the map, and maybe we'll let the boy live. Jackson pushed Sarah behind a stack of hay bales, drawing his Colt in one fluid motion. He fired twice through the gap, rewarded by a cry of pain. I count 4 of them, he whispered. Stay down. To his surprise, Sarah pulled her own revolver from her coat. I'm not hiding while you fight my battles, she said firmly. Sam taught me to shoot before Daniel was born. I can handle myself. Jackson reassessed the woman before him. 3 on the left, 1 circling behind. The next minutes passed in a blur of gunfire and shouted threats. Jackson dropped 1 man with a clean shot to the chest. Sarah wounded another in the shoulder. But Carver was crafty, working his way around to the barn's back entrance. The door burst open. Carver lunged inside, pistol raised, but froze at the unexpected sight of Sarah standing in the open, her revolver aimed directly at his heart. Sam Mitchell sends his regards, she said coldly, and pulled the trigger. The gun clicked. Empty. Carver's face split into a cruel grin as he raised his own weapon. Lady, you just made my day. 2 shots rang out simultaneously, Jackson's from behind a hay bale, and unexpectedly, another from the barn rafters above. Carver crumpled to the floor, a look of surprise frozen on his face. Blood bloomed across his chest from 2 separate wounds. Jackson spun, looking up to see Daniel perched in the hayloft, a small derringer smoking in his hand. Pa taught me to shoot too, the boy said, quietly. By evening, the waters began to recede, revealing a transformed landscape. The main house stood intact on high ground, but the bunkhouse and lower barns were severely damaged. We need to end this, Jackson said, studying the map Sarah had given him. Blackwood won't stop. What can we do? Sarah asked. He owns the town, the law. Then we make our own justice. Jackson loaded fresh rounds into his Colt. Stay here with Daniel. I'll handle Blackwood. Sarah caught his arm. No. He'll be waiting for that. We need to draw him out. Jackson considered her words, then nodded slowly. You have a plan? I do. She met his gaze unflinchingly. But you won't like it. The next morning, Sarah rode openly into Bitter Creek, Daniel beside her. They entered the bank as Jackson watched from the shadows across the street, Winchester rifle concealed beneath his long coat. Within minutes, Blackwood's men escorted them upstairs to his office. Jackson moved quietly around to the back of the building, scaling the exterior stairs to the second floor. Through the window, he could see Sarah standing defiantly before Blackwood's desk, the banker examining the map with greedy eyes. This is genuine, Blackwood demanded. Sam's original survey, Sarah confirmed. The gold seam runs directly beneath Remington's North Ridge. Blackwood smiled triumphantly. And Remington? Dead, Sarah said flatly. Caught in the flood, trying to save his precious cattle. Blackwood leaned back in his chair. A fitting end. The man always did care more about his ranch than people. He folded the map carefully. Now, about our arrangement. The window shattered as Jackson crashed through, rifle aimed squarely at Blackwood's chest. The banker lunged for a drawer, but froze as Sarah produced a derringer from her sleeve, aimed between his eyes. Don't, she said simply. You lied to me, Blackwood sputtered, looking at Sarah. Learned from the best, she replied coldly. Jackson moved forward, pressing his rifle barrel against Blackwood's temple. You killed my nephew, tried to steal my land, threatened my family. Your family, Blackwood laughed nervously. The woman's manipulating you, Remington. She's been working for me all along. Ask her about Colorado, about the other men she's tricked. Sarah's expression never wavered. That's right, Jackson. Ask me. Jackson's eyes flicked briefly to Sarah, then back to Blackwood. Don't need to. I know a snake when I see one. You're making a mistake, Blackwood hissed. I own this town. Kill me, and you'll never leave Bitter Creek alive. Who said anything about killing? Jackson smiled thinly. Sheriff's waiting downstairs. The real one, from Helena. Seems mighty interested in hearing about sabotaged dams and fraudulent land deals. Blackwood's face drained of color. Oh, and that map? Sarah added. Sam was smarter than you gave him credit for. The real gold's not on Remington land. It's directly beneath this bank. 6 months later, Remington Ranch was transformed. The flood damage had been repaired, and a small mining operation now operated on the North Ridge. Nothing extravagant, but enough to secure the future. On a crisp autumn morning, Jackson stood on his porch watching Daniel practice with a lasso, expertly roping a wooden calf. The boy had grown inches in the past months, his face losing its pinched, worried look. Sarah emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. He's getting good, she observed, coming to stand beside Jackson. Has his father's eye, Jackson agreed, and his great-uncle's determination. They stood in comfortable silence, shoulders just touching. I found something yesterday, Jackson said finally, his voice unusually soft, when we were clearing out the old storage shed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside lay a simple gold band, Elizabeth's wedding ring. I thought it was lost in the flood, he said quietly. Seems some things find their way back when they are meant to. He turned to face Sarah, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. I'm not one for pretty words, never have been, but I know what it means to lose everything, and I know what it means to find something worth fighting for again. Sarah's eyes glistened as she met his gaze. Are you asking me something, Mr. Remington? I'm asking if you and Daniel might consider making this arrangement permanent. If you might consider becoming Remingtons. Her smile broke like sunrise after the longest night. I believe we would consider that very carefully, Mr. Remington. She took his weathered hand in hers. And I believe our answer would be yes. The following Sunday, under a canopy of golden aspen leaves, Jackson and Sarah were married in a simple ceremony beside the small fenced plot where Elizabeth and Jane Remington rested. Daniel stood proudly between them, holding the rings on a small pillow he'd made himself. Jackson had planted an apple tree there the previous spring. It was small yet, but already showing signs of strength, its young branches reaching toward the sky. As the new family turned to walk back to the house, Jackson paused, looking out over the valley that had nearly claimed his life, and had instead given him a second chance at living. A man's legacy isn't in the land he owns, he said, one arm around Sarah, the other hand resting on Daniel's shoulder. It's in the people he protects and the values he defends. In the gathering twilight, Jackson Remington stood watch over his family, a sentinel against the coming night. The rifle at his side was no longer just a weapon, but a promise. In the bitter cold of a Montana winter, he'd discovered that even the most frozen heart could thaw when given something worth beating for. And in this harsh land where only the strongest survived, Jackson had found something even stronger than survival: redemption. If this story stirred something in your soul, hit that like button and share it with someone who understands that a man's true worth isn't measured by what he owns, but by what he's willing to defend. Subscribe to Frontier Tales for more stories of honor, courage, and the unyielding spirit that forged America's greatest generation. New stories weekly, where the West lives on.